Hello and welcome to the Westminster Institute. I'm Robert Riley, its director. Today we're very lucky to have with us Jim Robbins, who is the Dean of Academic Affairs at the Institute of World Politics, a graduate school institution here in Washington, D.C. that has an outstanding faculty in foreign affairs, intelligence, defense, and related issues. I'm happy to have Jim here because some years ago he was my dean at the College for International Security Affairs at National Defense University, where he was for some years. Jim has also worked in the Defense Department as a special assistant to the Secretary of Defense, for which service he received one of the highest civilian awards given in the building. And he's a renowned journalist. He covers national security affairs, foreign policy for USA Today, with many op-eds and editorials for the Washington Times, where he also received an award for his writing. And he's also a book author. He's written 5 books. I'll name a couple of them for you. The Real Custer, From Boy General to Tragic Hero. Critically acclaimed Last in Their Class, Custer Pickett and the Ghosts of West Point. And Dr. Robbins is at work on a new book about Ronald Reagan. Jim has appeared in multiple publications, Wall Street Journal, National Review, etc. Among his interests are terrorism, national security strategy, political theory, and military history. Courses he teaches at IWP include International Relations, Statecraft, and Integrated Strategy, and The Rise and Fall of Athens. One of his recent articles pertaining to the topic of today's program is titled, Deterring the Houthis Won't Be So Simple. Today, Jim and I are going to discuss who the Houthis are and how and if they can be stopped from strangling one of the critical sea lanes in the world. Jim, welcome to the program.
Hey, Bob. Thanks for having me.
So the Institute of World Politics is one of the very significant graduate schools in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yes. Well, we're the only private independent graduate school of national security, intelligence, and international affairs in the country. And we've been in existence for over 30 years, founded by Dr. John Lanchowski, whom you know well. And, just growing by leaps and bounds. We've had our highest enrollment ever this semester, which, again, we're a small and very specialized school, so it's not a lot of people, but it's growing all the time. We have, as you mentioned, doctorates, graduate degrees. We have an online program. We have international programs. It's just been a great experience at IWP.
I just wanted to mention, I not only know members of your faculty, but I've known some of the graduate students who've come to you from their own experiences in military affairs in the military itself or works in the field of intelligence. And after they get their credentials from you, they go back. So IWP seems to have met one of its primary missions, which is to influence those very fields of operation in which you offer study.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is all to the good.
Yes, about half of our students are mid-career professionals who take night courses with us and get their degrees, and it helps them in their various careers. A lot of our other students are just coming from undergrad and going to government. But there are many of them in the intelligence community, many in the defense community, a lesser number in the diplomatic community, but there's some there too, and then in the sort of national security adjacent contracting and things like that. But yeah, we've had thousands of people graduate from IWP, and it's really incredible when you look at the list of who they are and what they've done and what they're doing now all throughout government. It just gives you a sense of satisfaction.
Just for your information, many members of our audience who watch our videos that are of interest to them have backgrounds in the military and intelligence and defense.
Oh, great.
So they find this of interest.
Well, come to IWP.
Many of them are later in their careers or recently retired. But to our subject today, who are the Houthis and can they be stopped? This is an extremely complicated subject, as I was finding out and trying to give myself some background so we could have a conversation here. One of the background or articles I read said that since the 9th century, the Zaydis, which are the branch of Shia Islam that the Houthis follow, they have been fighting for predominance in Yemen for 1,000 years.
Yes, this is a long time fight. If you look at all of the different permutations of that struggle, the tribal struggles that have been going on in that part of the world, yes, you could say that this Houthi manifestation, which really dates from the 1990s in terms of what Ansar Allah, the group that we're currently seeing, but yes, this has roots that go back as far as time.
And of course, for a good deal of our lives, it was North Yemen and South Yemen. Mm-hmm. And I believe the country was only unified around 1990.
Right, and that's part of the question because Yemen has gone through different periods of unity and disunity over the years, sometimes because of foreign intervention or Western colonialism or other things that have influenced them. And the Houthis, when it was unified, they claimed to be the rightful government of Yemen. Of course, the actual government of Yemen disagrees with them, but that's part of what the struggle is about in this, they're going to stay united into one country, and if so, who's in charge of it?
And I believe that around the time of unification is when those deposits of oil and natural gas were found in the kind of border area between North and South Yemen. How does that get distributed today?
Well, it's very complicated because the government, the legitimate government, the one that we recognize that controls it, they try to use that as a lever to not allow others to finance whatever they're doing. The Houthis, however, do have control over some of that, and they have control over port facilities and are able independently just to exploit some of those oil resources and use that partly to fund what they're doing. It's not completely how they fund what they're doing because, of course, they get support from Iran. But they have been able to maintain some of their independence and some of their fighting capability because of that independent income stream.
Yemen is a drastically poor country. And when one reads about the length of these intramural battles, the length of the fighting, the ruthlessness with which it's fought, the grisly fate of the civilian population, which ends up not eating and also subject to diseases. There doesn't seem to be anything that's not going to stop them. They're just so focused on what they consider, I presume, a divine mission.
Oh, well, definitely. They consider themselves to be the legitimate rulers, that nothing is going to stop them. That's all part of the problem that I was writing about in that article, that when you have a highly motivated force, even if it's a guerrilla force or kind of a pseudo-state force like what they have, when they're highly motivated like that, you can't do like little pinprick operations and then say, okay, be reasonable and stop attacking us. Like I say, they're on a mission from God. They're going to continue to do what they're intending to do to get our attention and to try to further their mission. And of course, since they're part of this Iranian proxy network, the circle of fire that we were talking about, they can continue to get the supplies necessary to push this out.
So let's go over that circle, since that's the context in which they're fighting today. The one with the match, of course, is Iran.
Right. Iran, and then in Iraq they've got the different Shiite militia groups, and then Syria, and the Assad regime, and then other groups there. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas, or what's left of Hamas in Gaza, and then the Houthis in Yemen. That kind of makes up a circle.
Would you like to say something about the character of the kind of Islam that the Houthis follow, the Zaydi variety?
Well, it's, as you mentioned, it's a Shiite variety of Islam, so it's connected to the Iranian regime, although it's an offshoot that developed in Yemen. Some say it's one of the oldest forms of Shiite Islam, and of course Yemen itself is a very old civilization in that part of the world. Used to be extremely wealthy, right there along the Straits, and had a large Jewish civilization, which was based there. Also the place that coffee entered the Middle East, coming over from Africa. It was, coffee kind of originated there. So just a sidelight, but for those of us who are coffee lovers, thank Yemen for that.
What about the tribal situation? That's extremely complicated, is it not?
Yeah, as always, the situations are complicated. That's really the basis of the struggle, not just Sunni Shiite, but also tribal, of different groups there, and more than two. I mean, there's northern groups that are more connected to the Saudis, which was also part of an al-Qaeda presence earlier. I don't know if al-Qaeda is still active there, but they used to be. And then further east along the coast, you have different tribal groups that aren't really involved as much in this. So that's the type of thing that when we look at it geopolitically, it's not as important to us, but it's important to them in that they're going to continue those fights whether or not they're engaged externally or not. And if they're fighting amongst themselves, at least from a U.S. perspective, it's really not that big a deal. But when they start shooting at ships, and shooting at Tel Aviv and things like that, under the pay and guidance of foreign proxies, as a proxy for foreign intervention, then that's a problem. And then we've also seen things like, the Saudi and UAE intervention to try to settle it down. That isn't as evident now as much, and the Houthis aren't really firing as much at Riyadh like they were. But it just shows how those type of internecine struggles can suck us in a way that we don't want to be. Even in the past, like the British were there, the Egyptians intervened in the 1960s. They tried to settle it down. It's just been ongoing.
Well, the Egyptians are amongst the people who are suffering because the Houthis have so successfully been fighting, holding the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea hostage.
Yes.
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind are the Muslim emirates in North Africa in the 18th century, which were raiding Western shipping, including U.S. shipping in the early days of our republic, and our inability to stop them, or the Europeans' inability to stop them.
Yes.
So they just turned to paying them off to raid the other people's ships, not ours, until we did send some significant forces over there. Now, that's the first thing that comes to mind here. They're imperiling a good part of the world economy, as I understand it, because the insurance prices for ships going through that waterway have risen dramatically because of the dangers. No one knows exactly when the Houthis are going to send missiles or try to board them, or hijack the ship, that many that choose simply to sail around the Cape of Good Hope, which adds some 14 days to their trip and about $1 million in fuel. And so obviously the goods they are carrying have prices that have been going up. And since those goods are from all over the world, it's affecting a pretty wide swath of world trade. You would think under such circumstances, there would be a coalition that got together and said, we simply can't allow this.
Yes.
The other interesting thing I found is that 40% of the trade that used to go through the Bab al-Mandab straight into the Red Sea goes to Europe. So if anybody had an interest in stopping the Houthis, it would be the Europeans.
Yes.
But it doesn't seem to be. It's, aside from Great Britain, it's the United States that steps in.
True. Well, also France has been stepping in. Well, it's interesting that you mention piracy, because that Bab el-Mandeb Strait area historically has been a great area for piracy. But like any choke point, you're going to have people who are going to raid ships. The interesting thing about the Houthis is they're really not interested in piracy. They're just destroying stuff. I mean, they're terrorists. What do they gain by this? You know, I mean, it's one thing if you're a pirate and you're out raiding a ship and stealing stuff. Okay, fine, we can understand that. You're like further down in Somalia, where the Somali pirates come out and do these things. Okay, fine, it's for ransom or it's for loot or whatever. But with the Houthis, they're just experimenting in ways of utter disruption. And so it's much more difficult to deal with people who just want to destroy things. Now, as you say, most of this affects Europe, and it does raise costs. Hence the name of our original mission to try to defend this, Operation Prosperity Guardian. I mean, what a corny name, right? But okay, fine. But it encapsulated what they're trying to do, like stop this senseless raiding and try to create some kind of security. And yes, there were some European countries involved in this along with the United States, although, as usual, the United States had the largest presence in this thing. Unfortunately, when we started it, the United States, you know, under the Biden administration, and is in their usual way, was interested in just kind of calming things down. I think I had a statement in my piece on this from Admiral Kirby, well, now spokesman for the NSC, saying, we don't want to fight. You know, we're not there to fight. We're just trying to convince you to stop doing this. And we made these little pinprick raids and stuff like that. And they said, we just don't want this to escalate. And kind of, you know, not just telegraphing this, but explicitly stating, you know, please stop. We don't want this to go any further. And of course, that was back in January. It had no impact at all. If anything, things just got worse and worse and worse, because the Houthis understood that they would have to escalate greatly before the United States got serious.
I mean, if anything, the United States would simply lose respect by saying something like that. I mean, the Middle East, as you well know, is a very tough neighborhood. And if you exhibit the kind of weakness that's revealed in Admiral Kirby's statement, that's all they need to know.
Yes, it's always a bad idea to kind of try to telegraph that kind of weakness. And you could say, well, we're not actually weak. And of course, the United States is not weak. But if you're not going to use your strength, you might as well be weak. Yeah. Because if you're telling the other side, you know, for God's sake, we don't want to get into a fight with you, but they want to fight us. In fact, one of their slogans is "Death to America," so we know where they're coming from. Then yes, they're going to keep escalating it, and they have. In the original rules of engagement, and this has changed a bit, and we'll get to that, but in the original rules of engagement, we wouldn't fire it at any Houthi, you know, command posts or you know, troop areas or anything like that. The only thing that we were targeting were weapon systems, and the weapon system had to be like armed, ready to go, and pointed at us before we would do anything about it. So, you know, in other words, like the most strict rules of engagement, like you have to be under an exact threat, like where something is about to happen to you before we could interdict it. So if the missiles were just sitting there but pointed in another direction, okay, fine, we're not going to touch them. If there's a big stockpile of stuff there, okay, we're not going to bomb that. If there's a command post where they're hanging out, you know, giving the orders to attack us, we're not going to attack that. We're just going to attack the equipment that's pointed at us. And, you know, okay, so that's to minimize casualties, you know, human casualties, and to, again, you know, sort of keep this conflict in the box. But the result of that was that the Houthis said fine. And so they just adapted to that by not pointing weapons at us until they were ready to go, and doing other things that allowed them to just keep escalating the situation.
But the U.S. attitude has since changed. We learned somewhat of a lesson from that.
Well, yes, as of recently, just this month, it has changed. And I think part of the reason why it's changed was not because of a change on our side so much as on Israel. Because the whole reason that the Houthis said they were doing this and started this campaign was because of Gaza and what was happening there. And so they said that they were attacking ships that were going to Israel or Israeli-owned or had some connection to Israel. In fact, this isn't true. They were targeting all kinds of stuff. I mean, how would they know? They're getting intelligence support from Russia, incidentally, but still, they would make mistakes and attack the wrong ship and do a bunch of stuff. Okay, fine. So ultimately, what the Houthis decided was, let's just see if we can attack Israel directly, which they did. And they used some longer range missiles that they had to fire at Tel Aviv. Well, then the Israelis struck back. And the Israelis were not so limited by the same types of rules of engagement. So they went after the oil depots. They went after the oil infrastructure, which is really what's funding their little regime down there. I mean, it's one thing to knock out the weapons, but you start taking on their economic basis, then you're going to make a difference. Okay, so that the Houthis kind of paused with their attacks on Israel. They've done some more, but they kind of paused to try to reassess. Do we really want to go down this road? So once the Israelis made it evident that, okay, you can expand the type of war that this is going to be, then the United States responded better. And October 17th sent in B-2 bombers and took out like 5 underground bunkers where the Houthis were storing these weapons. And again, it's not like a personnel target, it's a counter weapon target, which is fine. But it showed how serious we were. And the other thing is, when you send in a B-2 bomber, that alone is sending a message to the Houthis. Like, we're sending our most advanced strategic weapon in to take out your ammo depots. What will we take out next time? Okay, so they're still attacking, but a lot less than they had been. In the past several weeks, they've kind of ramped it back. So maybe the point is being made to them that what they're doing is not worth it. The few ships that they're hitting or taking out, it may not be worth like losing everything, because maybe the next B-2 strike is going to be on them, not on their weapons, but on them.
And part of what the Israelis hit were facilities in Hadida,
yeah, the port.
The port, which is so important for the Houthis. It has allowed them egress to the sea and ocean to receive supplies and to keep going. Now, you mentioned very quickly, Jim, that Russia is providing them with information.
Right.
And there was recent news that they're considering providing targeting information. And the implied threat from Russia is that if you, NATO, allow the Ukrainians to use weapons that will go further into Russia, we'll simply supply the targeting data to the Houthis.
It's so interesting, isn't it, how these
interconnections.
These conflicts are interconnected, and how everybody has their proxy, and we're kind of, fighting them here or there. It's almost like the Cold War, with the Reagan Doctrine, or the Soviet Wars of National Liberation, where they were fighting us in, distant battle spaces. But now it's much more closely connected, and it's more overt. I mean, where the Russians are basically saying they're going to do it to try to deter us from what we're doing. But then that gets them involved in this conflict. And I don't think the Russians really want to be involved in that conflict. I mean, they got involved in Syria, which is a little more understandable. Now they're going to be, supporting the Houthis. Well, okay, fine. But I mean, at some point, they're going to overextend.
They do give them some military support now, do they not, in terms of weapons?
Yeah. Yes, they do, and they have for a long time, even back during the Cold War when there were terrorist groups operating there. And remember, the South Yemen was a communist country, and it was a Soviet proxy state. So yes, they've been involved in the region for a while. But if they want to try to somehow connect the Ukraine war to this war, which is really connected to the Gaza war, well, and we have the Iranians supplying the Russians with Shahed drones to fight the Ukrainians, and somehow the Chinese are going to get involved. I mean, it just gets really interesting.
What are the Iranians providing the Houthis with?
They're providing the more advanced weapons, so the missiles, the drones, helicopters that they've used to attack ships, things like that. Probably also intelligence support and communication support and things of that nature.
Obviously, Israel carried out a quite heavy-duty response to Iran's missile attack on Israel by striking some strategic targets that are purportedly going to make building missiles much more difficult for the Iranians.
Yes.
Is that your understanding of the consequences of that raid?
Yeah, hitting missile manufacturing, but also the missile bases of where they were based, and probably blowing up some of the stockpiled missiles themselves. So Israel was trying to strike Iran's ability to reach them, but leaving alone things like leadership targets, which some people talked about, even taking out the supreme leader, which would have really been an escalation, and also leaving alone the nuclear program, and leaving alone the energy infrastructure, which again, the Iranians are heavily dependent on energy to run their country. And the Israelis could attack Karg Island, they could attack oil fields, they could attack ships, a lot of things. They didn't do that this time. So it was kind of a limited strike and limited to the specific weapon systems that the Iranians were using to come out and reach them.
And limited at the instigation of the United States, which couldn't have been more public about what they didn't want the Israelis to do.
Yes, time and again, we hear that from the Biden administration. They're very focused on telling people what they can't do or what they shouldn't do, and please keep this in a box. We saw that in the response to the first missile attack, which was interdicted by a coalition force, and very well done. The U.S., Israel, Jordan, and some others who interdicted that attack. And then the Biden administration told the Israelis, take the win. Don't do anything. Don't hit back at all. Well, I mean, the Israelis ignored that, and they did do a limited strike, because in that part of the world, you can't just say, I'm too proud to fight. Really? Because you're going to get more, as we were discussing. I mean, you just can't signal weakness like that. You have to do something. And so they did do something. But the Biden administration's insistence that people just do nothing it's counterproductive, and it betrays this misunderstanding of the neighborhood they're dealing with.
Well, it was the Trump administration that initially put the Houthis on the terrorism list toward the end of the Trump administration. And then at the beginning of the Biden administration, they removed the Houthis, but now they have put the Houthis back on.
Right, and they told the Houthis, hey, if you stop your attacks, we'll take you off the list. So, the incentive, right, which the Houthis ignored. They're like, we don't care if we're on your damn list, right? Yeah. They couldn't care less.
They're going to the consequences of being on the list.
Exactly, yeah, sanctions or, some other things, there could be, but we're not actively doing it. Even though they were on the list, it wasn't being enforced. So to use that as the incentive, like, hey, we put you back on the list, but we'd really like to take you off the list. Well, they already took them off once. I mean, the Houthis know that they're weak on that issue. So that's not compelling them. I mean, B-2 bombers make a much stronger statement than, saying, hey, we'll give you this carrot of taking you off our terror list.
A number of commentators have remarked, Jim, that the fact that Israel was able to hit these targets inside Iran, including taking out some Russian-made, I think S-300.
Yeah, the air defenses.
With 100 planes involved in the operation, not losing a single one, has exposed weaknesses in Iran that, being in that tough neighborhood, must lose its some respect and even make its Ring of Fire allies wonder. Is that, do you think, right?
I would think so, yeah. Also, the fact that the Israelis could reach it, and we don't know how they were refueling or if they were refueling or what they were doing. I mean, it's a long-range strike. Of course, the strike to Hodeidah was also a long-range strike, even longer. So it's showing that the Israelis have strike capabilities that are probably a little more robust than people expected, because I know some people were thinking, well, maybe they couldn't really do that type of strike at all, or that it would be too complicated, or they'd have to fly around the Gulf or something like that. Well, clearly they're doing it in a way that, you know, they overfly, and they seem to have command of the air. As you say, they didn't lose a single aircraft. Certainly the Syrians weren't flying up to interdict them. Nobody from Iraq was doing anything. They kind of, you know, left off it. So
there was not even a mention of the Iranian Air Force.
Oh yeah, their remaining F-4 Phantom or whatever they have.
They didn't even try.
Yeah, they didn't go up to try to do anything. And yeah, if the Israelis are taking out the Russian-made air defenses, which are very sophisticated weapons that they get from Russia, but if the Israelis are able to take those out, that too is a signal to the Iranians, like, hey, you're pretty helpless before our air power. And that isn't even all of their stuff, because they do have missiles, and of course they have nuclear weapons.
Well, do you think the United States was prudent, that Biden was prudent in saying don't hit their nuclear capabilities, don't hit their oil-producing facilities? In other words, don't hit them where it really counts.
Well, it's really, whether we said it or not, it really comes down to whether the Israelis thought it would be worth it. And
worth hitting those?
Worth escalating the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're still very busy with Gaza. They're still very busy in Lebanon. I mean, they have other stuff to take care of right now. I think the Israelis calculated that it probably now is not the time to make that kind of escalation. After all, the Iranian second, missile attack that they did, even though it did hit some targets, unlike the first one, it didn't do an extreme amount of damage in Israel. So probably the Israelis figured, we can hurt them in this capability that they're using to strike us without saying, okay, it's on. Like, we're just going to start taking you out, like taking the regime out. Because if you're going to hit energy targets, nuclear targets, and especially leadership targets,
that is the regime.
Yeah, you're really at war at that point. And things like energy targets, who are you really hurting? It hurts the Iranian people. It would tank their economy. It wouldn't be good for them. The regime would probably survive and rally the people, say, look how bad the Israelis are making your life. So that may not be the best approach to it. We can think that the Israelis are looking at other ways to bring about the change, because the change is needed. I mean, I think you and I can certainly agree that the Islamic regime has to go. I mean, at some point, if we can convert Iran back into a durable U.S. ally, like it was during the Shah period,
that would be a major achievement.
Yeah, think of it strategically. That would just be incredible. That would fix so much of that region if we could just flip Iran back to a pro-U.S. posture. It's not going to happen with the current regime, but I'm certain the Israelis are thinking about that too. Like, how can they make things better in that region? And at some point, you have to deal with Iran.
Well, the fall of the Ayatollahs has been predicted many, many times, particularly when there's a huge amount of agitation in the public and huge demonstrations against the regime, whether it's over women keeping their hair covered or just the general miserable state of the economy. A number of analysts will say, well, this is it.
Right.
The regime has had it, but the regime hasn't had it. They're not afraid of using force to remain in power.
True, and we do very little to help in those situations. I think that some of these opposition groups look to the United States for leadership, and unfortunately, they just don't see it coming from us. I was just talking to our friend Elon Berman at American Foreign Policy Council. Yes. He's come out with a new monograph on that very subject about how do we do outreach to Iranian opposition groups. And he's not recommending kind of Operation Ajax style, 1950s style coup that we sponsor in Iran, nothing like that. But what he is saying is that we should be in touch with these people. We should be helping them come up with their political program, helping them organize, because a lot of these uprisings that we see are just kind of mob exercises. There's no coordination, there's no particular objective. It's just Margbar dictator, they burn down some buildings, but nothing happens. What Ilan's argument is, if I can paraphrase it, is just to help them organize, help them have a focus, help them work together so that the next time this happens, maybe they can do something about it.
Does he mention Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah, having any role to play?
I don't think he was getting into it that far, but you should have him as a guest and he'll tell you all about it.
He's around on the airwaves now because the more things heat up regarding Iran, the more people want to hear what he has to say, which is generally nobody here but us Democrats. He has no intention of going back there and assuming some role comparable to that which his father had as the Shah. In any event, Jim, there was another rather alarming front page piece in the Wall Street Journal recently that said the United States is running out of air defense missiles. And we're our resupply. We don't have enough industrial base to keep up with the rate at which we're firing these to protect our own shipping and people, as well as providing ample weapons to our allies, to the Ukrainians, to others in the region, and against the Houthis.
Right. That's funny. We were just talking about this last night in class at IWP about the fact that our country lacks the sustainment capacity to fight in a war. I mean, the United States is not in an active big war right now. We have different contingencies that we're involved in, but if there was a big war, then we'd really be out of ammo. We've been
in like a week.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we were shipping it to Ukraine, and they need it. It's fine. We've been using it to defend ourselves and other things. But if we really needed it, where we're actually firing off stuff all the time, we lack the industrial base to do it. We can buy it from other countries. We can try to import it. That would keep it going for a while, assuming we could just do that. I mean, the adversary we're fighting might have a say in that process. But if it came down to having the industrial capacity in our country to do it in all its aspects, including all the supply chains needed to build all this stuff, we import stuff from China for some of our components. I mean, come on. We wouldn't be able to do it, and that's a vital thing for the next administration, whoever it is, to get on. We have to build up that national capacity for resupply, for all the unsexy things. I mean, you have the weapon systems. Okay, fine, we have those, but how do you sustain them? We just really have no idea.
Well, I think probably there are people in the Chinese embassy in Washington who subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. And read about these problems, which are hardly new.
You saw it in World War I, the so-called shell crisis after the first year of war, when the British fired off all their ammunition and they figured out, wait a minute, we can't reload. And it contributed to bringing down their government. It was so acute. But so yes, this isn't a new problem. We've seen it before, but we're in the midst of it now.
Well, I have this production statistics for the World War II period, in which the industrial base of the United States was the largest in the world, and the number of planes per day, the number of aircraft carriers, the number of machine guns, the amount of ammunition. We could just simply go down the line, because we were supplying not only our own troops, we were supplying the Soviet Union, which would have been knocked out of the war had we not given them massive, massive supplies, plus our other allies like Great Britain. So it's not often spoken of, and it's not an exciting feature in films about World War II, but our industrial base basically won the war.
Yes. It's astonishing to look at figures like that about how much stuff we were producing, particularly, when you get into 1944 and we're really ramped up. Yes, it was absolutely incredible how much stuff we had, how much stuff we just like threw away at the end of the war. I mean, we were just like remaindering stuff because we didn't need it, but we had produced it. And then all of the ships that we had, and the ships that were necessary to sustain the Pacific side of that conflict. We had thousands of just supply ships getting the stuff, with the bullets, beans, and Band-Aids, as they say, to the troops that needed it. And today, we just don't have it. We like to push conflict out. I mean, that's been our doctrine for decades, to fight the war elsewhere and to not fight it here. So we push out our frontiers. Well, that's fine, but if you're actually fighting there, you have to get there. And it's not just getting the troops there and getting the planes and the tanks and stuff there. It's getting the supplies, just the endless amounts of ammo, just the endless amounts of reinforcements, all that stuff. How would we do that in a major theater conflict? There was a report, National Defense, Security report that came out, in which a bipartisan panel looked at this, and they just said, if we were in a major theater war today, we just couldn't handle it. We just wouldn't be able to do it.
And you can't replace or build up an industrial base except over a long period of time.
If you don't have it to begin with, which we did in World War II, but we don't now.
We don't now, and it's not just a matter of money, though of course you need a great deal of money to do that. It's a matter of skill sets. Where are the skilled craftsmen who know how to do this anymore? And
right.
Just as we have lost our highly productive ship manufacturing facilities and all the talents that go along with doing that, they're unionized, the prices are too high, those have been shut down. I think we only have 2 operating today.
Yes.
And so we have to turn to the South Koreans or others who have...
In Japan,
who have retained the ability in shipyards to make very good ships indeed and have the talent to do it. How we got to Japan now when we're talking about the Red Sea shows exactly how interconnected everything is. In fact, in one commentary, there was a Vietnamese, I don't know whether it was a policy analyst or an actual business person, talking about the inflationary impact of the increase of the cost, insurance, and also shipping costs from what the Houthis have been doing. So they're at the other side of the world. The Vietnamese are.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, it's a global market. So all the energy markets are interconnected, the food markets are interconnected. You disrupt one piece of it, of course things are going to go up. And we've already suffered that from the Black Sea disruptions, where, the
grain.
The grain exports, exactly. And so that's caused problems. The sanctions on Russia, which paradoxically just sort of don't stop Russian oil exports, but just cap them at a low price. Well, that's just allowed China to be the back door to buy cheap oil. So that's had a mitigating effect on the market in a strange way, but it's also it's fueling what China's doing, and it's giving Russia the capital to continue to fight their wars. So, yeah, you've got a whole interconnection it's global.
In light of which, Jim, how does one stop the Houthis?
How do you stop them? Well, I think the B-2 strikes made them think. I think the Israeli strikes made them think a little more carefully. I was saying in my original piece from January that deterrence would be difficult, but they are being a little more deterred now because they're standing up to them more. I mean, the Houthis are not some superpower. There are a bunch of people, down there doing an unprecedented attack on global shipping, and kind of got the drop on the international community in doing it, because who would expect that? Well, now the international community is banded together and is being a little more serious about the response. So I think some more discipline on the Houthis will be helpful. Also, telling the Iranians, we know that you're behind this, you're behind all of this, and maybe there needs to be more of an international response. Maybe it's not just saying, okay, Israel, you take care of it, and just kind of pushing the Israelis ahead and we don't do anything. well, maybe we should start doing something. Maybe we should be a little more vigorous in enforcing against the Iranians some consequences for funding this disruption that's having these global impacts.
So the Houthi excuse for undertaking this extraordinary action is supposedly to influence Israel in Gaza.
Right.
So get out of Gaza and we'll stop.
Yes.
Now, do you think they thought that up all on their own, or with Iranian inspiration, or
Oh, well, I'm sure.
where did that come from?
I mean, as soon as the Gaza war started, you saw all of the pro-Iranian groups, the Iranian-supported groups, starting to do stuff. Hezbollah started their rocket campaign against northern Israel. You had Iraqi militias starting to get more active, and people in Syria who were doing things. And then the Houthis joined in. I mean, yes, Iran is it's the center of this. And as we said before, nothing is going to get fixed in that region until that is taken care of. Because once you take Iran out of the picture, these other places aren't going to be as active. I mean, they'll still be there, sure, but not as well equipped, not as annoying as they have been.
We know about the well-known tension between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis,
Oh, yeah.
and the fact that the Saudis have fought in Yemen to try to suppress them, and what's so unusual, unsuccessfully.
Well, I mean, yeah, they kind of tamped it down, and of course, you were talking about the brutality of some of these conflicts. I mean, that was pretty brutal too. In fact, the United States was objecting to it because it was getting a little out of hand. And it's noteworthy that the Houthis aren't really attacking the Saudis directly like they used to. I mean, they were a pretty big threat. That's what got this intervention going. Now the Houthis have turned to doing other things. But I could see the Saudis jumping back in if they had to. They just haven't had to recently because the Houthis are otherwise occupied.
Now, the Egyptians have in the past, in fact, I think in the distant past, been involved in Yemen. They are being materially hurt by the huge drop in revenue from ship passage, and you'd think it would be in their interest to do something.
Yes, I don't really see the Egyptian military wanting to do an expedition anywhere. They're busy trying to keep a lid on their own problems.
Their own people.
Yeah, their own people. Also, terror groups that are operating inside Egypt, in Sinai and elsewhere, and then also trying to keep the whole Hamas thing bottled up, even though they benefit from that, as we saw from those superhighway tunnels where the smuggling was going on. I mean, someone was benefiting from that, and it's probably Egyptians. So they have different things to worry about right now. It would be very difficult for them to mount some kind of expeditionary force to go in and fix the Houthi situation. And they would need help doing it, and the help would have to come from us probably. And I don't see any will on our part to do anything of that nature. It's just not big enough of a threat. I think it's being mitigated. If it got to be to the point where shipping just stopped, where the Houthis were getting so effective with their targeting and with their weapons that they were just taking out ships right and left, which they haven't been. I mean, they've been threatening, but they haven't been like sinking everything. If it got to that point, then yeah, something would have to happen.
Well, they don't have to have the effect of the economic damage they've created. They just have to create the fear that they might do something, because they have in the past. But I think the revenue from the Suez Canal lost to the Egyptian government is a real hit. That's got to hurt them.
Well, if they want to get active and do something about it, then I'm sure the international community would be thrilled if they would. But I just don't see it happening in a serious way. Like they would actually go back into Yemen. I wouldn't see that.
So the serious actors in the situation today are obviously Israel, and to a certain extent the United States, now that they've upped their game to the B-2s. I mean, I know the French were initially helpful, as were Great Britain. Are they still?
I think they're still patrolling.
They are.
I know that we had pulled back and then we pulled back up. I mean, it kind of goes through rotations. I haven't looked at it today, but I'm pretty sure that there's still a European presence there. And India also had some ships that were, coming up from the Gulf of Aden side. So different international actors are involved in this to one extent or another.
Well, this may be a comment out of left field, but one remembers in the early days of World War II that Great Britain was relying to a huge degree on shipping to receive foodstuff, supplies, etc., to survive and to stay in the war. And the United States under Roosevelt was very active in providing those supplies, but it looked for a while very iffy because of the effectiveness of the German submarine force, not only in the North Atlantic in nailing a great deal of our shipping, but in the Gulf of Mexico, where they just about wiped out our shipping from our southern ports. And then whoever came up with the brilliant idea of convoys saved the situation, because the ships sailing in convoys had better protection, and the rate at which the tonnage was sunk went way down. Now, I only go into that history wondering if commercial convoys going into the Red Sea would be one way of, obviously escorted with military.
Right, don't forget the escorts, because the convoys were ringed with destroyers who were patrolling and looking for the submarines and sinking them.
So it's a little different situation.
Yeah, I don't know if you need convoys to get them through so much as the threat of force, because fighting the submarines, of course, it was detecting them, and it was all a surprise attack and stuff like that. We know where the Houthis are. We don't have to, search for them. We can spot them. We know where they're hiding their stuff. I mean, if we were serious about it, convoying through, sure, it might present them with bigger targets. I don't know, but really, it's the response that's the key.
Well, one hears after many of these attacks that the Houthis keep doing it. They're not deterred, and we don't seem to have destroyed enough of their stuff that they can't keep firing these missiles. Do you think that's an inaccurate assessment, or?
It's somewhat accurate, although the number of attacks has dropped. I mean, it was...
They didn't attack for something like 18 days recently.
Yeah, but they've started again, but maybe they'll stop again if we bomb them again. At some point, they have to reload too. If we're destroying their underground bunkers where they're storing this stuff, then that puts a crimp on it. If we could interdict more of the Iranian ships that are bringing in these weapons, that would be another approach to it. I mean, there's nothing stopping us from doing that because it's completely illegal activity, and we could stop and board those ships and confiscate all that stuff. That would take a lot bigger commitment, during the Reagan period, Operation Praying Mantis, where we went into the Gulf and started stopping ships and occupying Iranian oil facilities and things like that, which had been manned by IRGC and terrorists and stuff. So it's possible to do that. I don't think there's a national commitment here to do that. But if it got too bad, then why not? We have a lot of tools at our disposal.
I haven't followed it assiduously, but to my mind, I can't really think of this. Foreign policy issues have impinged on the presidential campaign, but I don't recall Yemen having been mentioned.
I don't think so. I don't. I haven't heard. Well, certainly one candidate doesn't really talk about issues, and I haven't heard the other candidate say anything about it, but it may be out there.
Well, anyway, I'd like to thank you, Jim, for coming over here and talking to the Westminster Institute. Dr. Robbins is the Dean of Academics at the Institute for World Politics in Washington, D.C. And thank you for joining us for another episode of the Westminster Institute. I would like to invite our audience, by the way, to go to our website or to our YouTube channel, where you will see a variety of other subjects discussed with experts like Jim, albeit on Ukraine, Russia, China, Japan, Taiwan, and even the real causes of inflation. Again, thank you for joining us today. I'm Robert Riley.